All right, we're about ready to go. Everybody here that needs to be here. I will go ahead and call the meeting to order, and I will go ahead and read the Declaration of State of Emergency documentation. Due to the nature of the Declaration of State of Emergency, due to novel contravirus COVID-19 pursuant to code sections 2.2-3708.2, this meeting and public hearing are to be held by electronic communications via the web platform GoToMeeting. The catastrophic nature of the declaration of emergency makes it impractical and unsafe to assemble a quorum in a single location, and the purpose of this meeting is to discuss or transact the business statutorily required or necessary to continue operations of the public body. A recording of this virtual meeting will be posted on the FAMPO Policy Committee webpage, www.fampo.gwregion.org/policy-committee. All right, having said that, I will call the meeting to order and ask Stacy for a roll call.
From Stafford County, Cindy Shelton.
Present.
Mark Dudenheffer.
I am definitely here.
Crystal Vanucci.
Here.
Meg Baumke. Thomas Cohen. Matthew Kelly from Fredericksburg.
Sorry about this. I am here, but I'm not on FAMPO, and neither is Tom Cohen. Sorry about that.
Okay,
Here.
we have you as an alternate. We were just also calling alternates. It's from the
Matt
city
Kelly's
of Fredericksburg. Matt Kelly, thank you. William Withers.
Here.
Tim Barodi.
Here.
Mark Whitley.
That's not Mark.
I didn't think so. Doug Fawcett. From Spotsylvania, Tim McLaughlin. Tim, are you there?
I'm here.
Chris Yakubowski.
Here.
Deborah Frazier.
Here.
Dave Ross. Kevin Marshall. Charles Steigerwald from PRTC.
Here.
Marcy Parker.
Here.
Michelle Shropshire.
Here.
From King George, Ann Kupka.
Here.
Kathy Binder.
Here.
From Caroline County, Nancy Long. Jeffrey Black. From Fred, Jamie Jackson.
Here.
Craig Reed. From Federal Transit, Tanya Holland. Getting a lot of feedback. I can't, if you can please mute your mics if you're not speaking. So from Federal Transit, Tanya Holland. Okay. Susan Gardner from VDOT.
I'm here.
Stephen Haynes from VDOT.
Here.
From DRPT, Todd Horsley.
I'm here.
Jennifer DeBrule. From CTB, Cedric Rucker. From CTAC, Dave McLaughlin.
Here.
From Federal Highway, Ivan Rucker. And that concludes roll call, and we do have a quorum.
Thank you, Stacy. All right, we have next on the agenda approval of the June 15, 2020 Policy Committee agenda. Does Chair will entertain a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to add something to the agenda.
Fire away.
we'd like to add the presentation that was made in the the GWRC meeting from from Paul Agnello, who made that presentation at the GWRC meeting.
Where do you want to put it in the agenda?
Item 9.
All right, we'll put it, can we put it, we'll add it as 9. Holy heck.
It might be under 3.
I guess 9E. Is that right? Yeah, 9E. All right.
Need a second on that or no? Huh?
Yeah, we need a
I'll
second. All right. Any
I
further
second.
discussion on the agenda? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Mr. Chairman, 9B, please. Mr. Chairman, 9B, can we have it added there, please?
I have no problem with that.
Okay, thank you.
All right. All those in favor of the modified agenda, say aye.
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 Anybody opposed, state their name. Any abstentions, state your name. All right. We're done with that. Public involvement. Stacy, I understand we have a written statement. Is that correct? For public involvement?
Yes, that's correct.
Why don't you go ahead and read that, and then I'll open it up for any other comments.
The first one, and then we also have one under the public comment hearing portion too. But
Well,
the
we'll
first
take care of the we'll do the same
Robert
thing in the public.
Thomas, a city resident and Spotsylvania property owner.
Go ahead.
Okay, we might be a bit delayed. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, this is from Robert Thomas, city resident and Spotsy property owner. He's concerned that the city sidewalks are too narrow without enough crosswalks. And he states that while there are trails in the region, many allow bikes, which pose a danger to pedestrians, particularly older folks. These are health issues and people need ways to safely exercise.
All right. Thank you for those comments. Is there anybody else online here from the public who wishes to make a comment to the board? Hearing none, we'll move on to the public hearing. Stacy, do you want to read what the public hearing is about, please?
Yes, so this is a public hearing that's being held for the draft 2045 Long Range Transportation Plan, known as the LRTP amendment, also for a related draft air quality conformity analysis report, also for a draft of the fiscal year 2021 Unified Planning Work Program, and also for a draft of the fiscal year 2020 UPWP amendment.
All right.
And we have,
go ahead. You have one public comment?
yes, we do.
All right, go
this
ahead.
is from Paul Agnello, Assistant Director for Transportation Planning for Spotsylvania County. I am writing in support of GWRC providing staffing for 7 full-time equivalent positions and an intern for fiscal year 21, as is shown in the draft fiscal year 21 UPWP for public comment. This level of staffing is necessary in order for FAMPO to continue to perform its federally required transportation planning responsibilities in fiscal year 21, including making significant progress on completing the region's 2050 long-range transportation plan. The fiscal year 21 budget for PL/5303 can clearly support this level of funding, and this funding amount does not include the $72,000 in rural SPR funding or $200,000 in previous STBG/RSTP for the 2050 LRTP, which are also available for FAMPO staffing, bringing the total fiscal year 21 FAMPO staffing budgets to approximately a little over $1 million. GWRC is forecasting a large PL 5303 carryover amount of about $230K from fiscal year 21 to fiscal year 22, and FAMPO funding levels are expected to rise significantly by fiscal year 23 and 24 as a result of federal transportation reauthorization of the FAST Act and increased allocations due to 2020 census results. So having enough future funding for 7 full-time equivalent positions and an intern should not be an issue. Second comment, I recommend extending the deadline for 2050 long-range transportation plan from June 2021 to December 2021 to provide additional time for GWRC to develop the FAMPO staffing necessary to complete the 2050 LRTP. And that concludes Paul Agnello's comments on the draft fiscal year 21 UPWP.
All right, thank you. Anybody else from the public online wishing to make comments? All right, hearing none, we will move on to item 7, chairman's comments. Only comment I have is that the person that we are looking at for the position of FAMPO administrator has decided to go elsewhere. So we are basically back to square one. Basically what we'll end up doing, unless I hear otherwise, is to look at re-advertising the position, possibly bringing it back to the board at its next meeting in July, and to discuss exactly how we will proceed with that advertisement. Anybody have any other suggestions or ideas?
Mr. Chair, just
Ms. Tim?
so are we just not going to just put the advertisement back out again and see what we get? I mean, you know, the economy's changing, so who knows what we'll get if we put it out now? I guess my
Well,
question.
do you want us to look? We had this discussion before on how big and how broad it was the first time. Do you want to look at changing it in any way before we send it out? Do you want to do that as an executive committee issue?
Well, how broad did we go? I guess the question. Do we? I mean, hell, we got people from Iran that can, you know, so we were pretty broad the last time. So, but we can go back out again. I mean, it doesn't hurt to go back and advertise again and say, look, who's out there now? You know, with all these folks have been doing the stay-at-home stuff, so people may have changed their whole mindset about commuting now. So. I would suggest we go ahead and put it back out, same solicitation, and see what we get. It doesn't cost that much more to do it, and see what happens.
Anybody else want to comment? I'm assuming that by that you want to go with just re-advertising as we did before.
Well, let me throw one other thing at it. Just be, you know, as the county, we've gone out and hired a headhunter. You know, we had a hard time getting somebody. Is it worth bringing somebody in to try to find somebody? I mean, it probably costs us like $15,000 to hire somebody, to get a headhunter to go out and find somebody, because we haven't had any success. I'm generally, I don't support that, but being that we've had a hard time finding somebody, maybe it's worth a discussion.
Well, I'm open to discussion, so I'm waiting. Anybody else want to chime in?
Mr. Kelly, if I might, it might be worth asking VDOT if that is an expense that can be reimbursed, or what the funding source for that could be.
Marcy, you're on the spot.
Yeah, I'm going to say I don't know. I'll defer to Michelle or Susan on that.
Michelle or Susan?
This is Michelle. We'll have to check in on that. I don't know that offhand.
All right. What I'm going to do, Tim, to your point, we'll get the word in from VDOT on what they can do with regards to potential reimbursement. We can get the executive committee together in the next few days or the next week, and then we can kind of map it out and get it out to everybody.
That might be I agree. That might be a good solution to move this forward, because we're looking for a specialized person to fill this billet. Yeah. Okay.
All right. Well, we'll see who's on the executive committee after the end of the evening. All right. Okay. Nothing else from me. We go to the consent agenda. All we have is one item with the approval of the May 18th, 2020 Policy Committee meeting minutes. Chair will entertain a motion.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second,
All right. Okay. Any issues, modifications to the minutes? All right, hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed, please state your name. Any abstentions, please state your name. All right. Item 9A, action discussion items. 9A is FAMPO on-call consultants update. Dr. Millsaps.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. As some of you heard before, the FAMPO on-call consultant contracts have run not only their 3 years, but have been extended the legally allowed 2 additional years. So we need to go out and do new on-call agreements. The hope had been that that would happen with a new administrator, since that's not happening immediately. As an interim step, we can use the on-call agreements with VDOT. Some of our other MPOs, particularly the Richmond one, use that, and they actually use it exclusively, very successfully. So we will look at doing that in the interim, and then later this summer, we'll bring you a draft on-call RFP for you all to consider. That's the update, Mr. Chair.
All right, any questions from the board? All right, we will go to the new item B. Mark, do you want to introduce this?
Certainly a lot of discussion right now about the staffing levels for FAMPO. And I believe that there are some additional numbers that were used and analyzed based on numbers that we had been asking for quite some time that we got last Thursday. And then they were used in GWRC to say that no one had a time to really look at them. We kind of felt that it took a little longer than it should have to get the numbers that we needed to work on the analysis. But right now, I'd like to introduce Mr. Agnello to present the same presentation he presented at the GWRC meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Dunheffer, and thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the FAMPO board. What the leadership of the TAC localities did is basically when we saw the information come out basically on the GWRC and FAMPO agendas on Thursday, we took a look basically at what the historical UPWP data said for basically PL and 5300 funding, as well as other FAMPO fundings that are available. I'll say that PL and 5303, those are the 2 core funding types that FAMPO has. The rural SPR, that is the funding type that GWRC gets to do transition planning for Caroline and King George counties. So sometimes there are special grant monies that FAMPO gets. That's basically when FAMPO staff go out and apply for it. And they did that basically in FY19 and 20 for basically the DRC grant for the Lafayette Boulevard Transit Study. But I'll say, as you look at the numbers, you see that they increased significantly from FY16 to FY21. If you look at the FY16 total, it's about 608,000. The FY21 total was about 959,000. That's an increase of about 58%. That increase is due to growth in PL and 5303 funding. I'll say that the number of FAMPO positions was historically 6, FY13 through FY18. In FY19, it was 7, and then in FY20, it was 8. The draft FY21 UPWP that went out for public comment on May 14th had 7 positions. If you look down kind of at the lower left, you see just the growth in the PL and the 5303 and 5303 funding, basically over the course of the last 5 years or so. I'll say in addition to the 5303 PL and rural SPR funding for FY21, there is 200,000 in STBG RCP funding for the 2050 LRTP. And this is in the GWRC budget. Right now, in the GWRC budget, it's scheduled all to go to a consultant. But I'll say that the FAMPO TAC recommended that it be made available to staff. And if you include that 200,000 with the other monies that are available, the total amounts available for FAMPO funding is $1,159,000 for FY21. Given this amount of funding, there's no fiscal reason to decrease FAMPO staffing at this time from the 7 positions that are in the draft FY21 UPWP. If you could please go to the next slide. So we also took a look at just kind of what future funding might look like. I'll say that because of the current FAMPO staffing, there are only 3 current staff and a few part-time staff, and the higher level positions are not filled. FAMPO basically ran a huge surplus in FY20, had a record amount of PL and 5303 not spent. That's being carried over to FY21. That's one of the reasons why that number for FY21 does jump up a bit. I'll say, but based on the current FAMPO staffing, there's also projected to be a huge, basically, carryover to FY22. The current GWC budget is assuming about a 232,000 carryover from FY21 to FY22. I'd say in FY23, it's expected that the results of the Federal Transition Bill reauthorization of the FAST Act will go into effect, and that increase will give at least a 10% bump in FAMPO PL and 5303 funding. Potential could be significantly higher than that because federal agencies have been very supportive of MPO efforts, and basically the FAMPO PL and 5303 has not gotten a bump in a number of years. The other larger increase, which is going to happen, is because of the 2020 census. The 5303 and PL funding is based on population. The Fredericksburg region is one of the fastest growing regions of the state. It's be kind of neck and neck with Northern Virginia for number 1. So a lot of other MPO regions in the state are not growing that fast, such as Danville, Roanoke, Petersburg area. So because of that, basically when the 2020 census figures become available, Fredericksburg will basically gain a greater share of the state's PL and 5303 funding. Conservatively, we estimate that will go up at least 25%. I'll say if you look at the 2010 census, it was a much higher percentage than that. So we view this 10% bump for the Federal Transition Bill reauthorization and the 25% for the 2020 decennial census. We view those numbers as being conservative. If you go with those numbers, though, the projections you see for the PL basically are kind of shown there in red. And you can see that by FY24, the numbers are actually significantly higher than basically for FY21, and then continue to grow in the future. I say that the base growth for basically all the years was assumed to be 2.13%, which was based on the historical growth of 5303 funding for the FY16 to FY20 timeframe. Based on this, it seems that funding is expected to significantly increase in the coming years with the FAMPO PL and 5303 funding, and that funding level combined with the GWC rural funding can support 7 positions for FY21 and in the future. And in the future, the FAMPO funding level could support additional staff expenses above 7 full-time equivalent staff. We also took a look at GW Ride Connect staffing because there have been some questions with that. I'll say that the recommendations from the TAC recommend allocating $125,000 in CMAQ funding for GW Ride Connect in FY21. In FY22, it's currently recommended that funding level will stop and that other sources replace that funding. And there are several sources that could help replace that funding. But I'll say that if other sources do not pan out, $185,000 in near-term CMAQ is being held in reserve to be available for GW Ride Connect if they've explored the other options and they're not available. I'll say that the TAC leadership, we want to basically help keep GWC staff of FAMPO and GW Ride Connect whole. We've looked basically at constructive ways to develop funding basically that can only be used for staff, to use for the staff expenses to free up additional CMAQ and RSVP for local transportation projects. Since that funding basically can be used for the local transportation projects, whereas some of the other funding types like PL 5303 and some of the DRP grant fundings, 5307 cannot be used for most local transportation projects. We're just going down kind of through some of the ideas we came up with to help GW Ride Connect. One is guaranteeing the full $125,000 CMAQ funding through FY22. We looked at the results from basically the third quarter FAMPO UPWP quarterly reports, And through the end of March, only $40,853 of the $125,000, or 32.7%, actually been spent. If you extrapolate this to the end of the year, it would be $54,471 for FY20, or 43.6%. And this is with the same 5 staff that are being proposed for basically the charge to the CMAQ grant funding in FY21. So this move would basically provide GW Ride Connect with additional budget flexibility for FY21 and 22, and potentially maybe provide all the CMAQ funding they would need for actually 2 years instead of 1. The second item is basically to explore I-395/95 commuter choice funding to supplement GW Ride Connect staff and/or marketing funding, so that TDM is an eligible expense for program funding. And the next call for projects is coming up in late 2020 for FY22-23 funding. So basically the timing for this could work out very well with the GW Ride Connect schedule. Number 3 is to explore DRP grant funding for FY22 above the $496.21 given for FY19 to FY21. Fourth is to explore using 5307 funding for multimodal planning under FAMPO for activities where GW Ride Connect work overlaps with FAMPO work. We have a slide that will talk about this in a little bit more detail. And then number 5, about 40% of the planned GW Ride Connect staff expenditures are for GWC management administration. We think that it could be explored shifting some of this to indirect or other GWC programs. And then they note if FAMPO was fully staffed, this would help generate more indirect for GWC management to use. Number 6, we notice that other staff expenses covering travel, training, supplies, membership, and other small expenses more than doubled from FY19 to FY21, from over $23,000 to over $47,000. We think that ways could be explored to reduce these expenditures to be more consistent with the FY19 expenditures, which was the last year that basically Diana was managing GW Ride Connect. If you go to the next slide, please. So this slide is just kind of exploring ways that 5307 could be used to help fund GWC staff expenses as an alternative to STBG RSTP funding or CMAQ funding. So that 5307 funding can be used for multimodal planning. The source for this is a GW Ride Connect 5307 presentation, GWC back in April of 2018. FAMPO conducts multimodal planning and has considerable overlap with GW Ride Connect in the transit TDM planning arena. I'll say basically with these two kind of circles, it basically creates what in math they call like a Venn diagram. It's kind of like the overlap between the two. And the overlap between the two is transit TDM planning. And you can just see some examples. There are other potential examples that could be pursued, but one thing, just looking at basically the GW Ride Connect work plan and the FAMPO UPWP for FY21 is that FAMPO is planning to do a LRTP 2050, and that has a transit and TDM component. And GW Ride Connect is planning to do their TDM strategic plan. So historically, the GW Ride Connect TDM strategic plan forms the backbone of the TDM component of the FAMPO 2050 LRTP. I say that the TIP and the CMP also look for kind of TDM strategies, so they can maybe kind of draw some of the work that GW Ride Connect does. So this is a way where basically the two programs could potentially work together. And basically GW Ride Connect could potentially work under FAMPO and basically do the TDM component of their plan for them using 5307 funding. And it becomes a win-win that helps both GW Ride Connect and helps FAMPO and helps GWC. With commuter lot surveys, FAMPO sometimes does surveys, GW Ride Connect does surveys. Those surveys could be done together for basically the VRE commuter lots as well as the non-VRE commuter lots. That's ineligible, basically FAMPO activity. 5307 funding can be used potentially to do that data collection under the FAMPO banner. So with FAMPO meetings for the TAC and BPAC, GW Ride Connect is part of those, attends those, so there's opportunity there. State meetings such as VTrans, 6-year plan I-95, again, basically GW Ride Connect participates in those. There'd be an opportunity to basically participate under the FAMPO banner and basically utilize 5307 funds for that. And then lastly, for bike ped planning, GW Ride Connect has looked into bike share and basically just and bike ped improvements to kind of facilitate the transit and TDM, and FAMPO does the same thing. So again, there's an opportunity for basically some synergy and for there to be a win-win. And there could be other ways that this could be done as well. I'll say that there are GW Ride Connect areas like marketing, like FAMPO program administration, which are not eligible for 5307, and we acknowledge that. But we think that 5307 can be part of the solution to help being a better fund, not only FAMPO, but also GW Ride Connect. I say that the 5307 funding, it's a significant new source of funding starting in FY20. Most of the FY20 funding has been allocated, but I'll say that there's 100,000 that's not allocated, so that could potentially be used for this effort. And there's an estimated 1.3 million coming about in FY21. And that funding level is expected to continue in the future at that level and maybe even increasing a little bit. So this is a new basically revenue source like CMAQ or CBGRSP, which can be used to help GWC staffing needs in the future. And with that, I'll stop and I can take questions.
Any questions from the board?
Hey, thanks, Paul. I apologize to the rest of the board here that I forgot that he had additional information he was going to present above what he did at GWRC. So, but I think it's very clear that we have options in order to maintain the staffing at FAMPO, which is critical for the future of all of our road and transportation problems in the future.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Withers?
Dr. Millsap, were you involved in any of the discussion of this?
Mr. Chair, no, this is also all new information. So the first time I saw the first couple of slides was at the GWRC meeting, and now this is the first time I see all this related to GW Ride Connect.
Mr. Chairman?
So it's intriguing to me.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question?
Mark, hold it. Linda's got the floor.
Okay.
Linda, go ahead.
Thank you. If I might, so for clarification, now that I have had just a few minutes to look at a few of these things, you know, the position that we have put forward from elimination on the GWRC side, since the budget went out, is an administrative assistant position because we feel there is not sufficient work for that. So I think somehow in this that seems to have been lost a little bit. But beyond that, no, to Mr. Withers' question, no, I had not seen this before.
Mr. Chair,
Wait, can I ask a question?
Mr. Chair, I need a follow-up.
Mr. Withers, then Mark, you after Mr. Withers.
Thank you.
So, you know, we're wondering why we don't have a FAMPO administrator. This to me is just remarkable that board members decided to bring this to this full board without having a discussion with the administrator about it. It's mind-boggling to me that it's I don't know what else to say. I can't believe that you guys would do this without sitting down and going over this with Dr. Millsap first. I'm done.
All right,
Wait,
Mark.
If you don't mind, Billy, I can understand what you're saying. My question or my point I'll make is, when was this information that we used in this analysis requested? How long did it take it to get to us? Why did we only get it last Thursday? And then we plugged it in and came up with this presentation, which is really a regurgitation of exactly the same numbers we got from the staff, from VDOT and from GWRC. And now we're sitting here, we waited till last minute. This is almost like a tactic. Let's stretch it out, and then we'll get to the end and we'll be stuck because we'll just say that we didn't have time to look at the numbers. My question would be is, our staff developed these presentations from the numbers we got from you. Why didn't the staff at GWRC come up with the same type of solution, except It frustrates me because I know for months we've been asking for and trying to get information, and it's like pulling teeth to get that information as we've gone through, Billy. And it's when you finally get it and you get it last minute, then you throw it, you do it the best you can with the best people you have, and you present it, and then they say, oh, well, we didn't have a chance to look at it. And I find that to be a foul.
Well, it seems to
Hold on,
me
Billy.
you would have all,
Recognize you first. I don't want to get into a conversation mode. Billy, go ahead.
all right, I'll drop off.
No, you can. I just want to make sure everybody's acknowledged before they
just
speak.
feel
I don't want to
like-
get arguments going on.
I'm not arguing. I'm just,
Okay.
this is not an argument. This is just a thing with me that respect of administrator. I would have hoped that even if you just got it completed Friday, somebody would have gone by today sometimes and gone over this with Dr. Millsap and said, what do you think? I don't know. I'm pretty much a stickler on stuff like that. I like to respect my administrator. If I got something to talk to her about, I'm going to talk to her about it before I put it up on a public screen. Okay.
My only point, Billy, in counterpoint of that is that our staff came in all weekend long, having just received the information at the end of last week, and spent the entire weekend working on this up until almost the last minute here.
Can I jump in? Chairman's going to jump in to end this conversation. Just make two quick comments. One, the GWRC staff was operating on information provided by the TAC to the staff when putting this budget together. After a discussion of trying to rework out how we spend 5307, 5303, CMAQ, and RSTP funds, with a request not to use so much RSTP funds related to the issue of staffing and such to free up money for other projects. That's one. So staff was operating based on the recommendations coming out up until recently from our respective staffs. Two, as much as we're throwing these numbers around, CMAQ, RSTP, 5307, 5303, we as a policy committee, as we are going to be discussing after this, are still trying to figure out how and what directions we're going to be spending those funds. The last point is with regards to GW Ryken, I'm going to look at these, and I'm not in any way prejudicing. The only question I asked the GWRC meeting again was, did the feds and VDOT staff get a chance to look at all this analysis to get their opinion, as they are basically the people who control and make the rules. Whether we like it or not, that's the fact. But with regards to GW Ride Connect, this policy board, since I've been on it, which has been quite a few years, has made a long-term commitment of funding to make sure GW Ride Connect continues on, because it has a great beneficial function, which fundamentally, as we argue about numbers and pots of money, is what we're in the business of doing, which is moving people. And that commitment included an out-year commitment, not saying we might find money here, we might find money there. So in moving this discussion forward, and this discussion will continue, it needs to come back with what is the hardcore funding source going to be for GW Ride Connect in the out years. Done from the chairman. Anybody else want to comment?
Mr. Chairman, this is
Yes.
Michelle. I wanted to add some clarity in it that I didn't receive anything until I think Thursday that was talking about removing FAMPO membership because suddenly we don't have enough money to be able to do that. So as you know, from what's happened in the last 2 years, I asked staff to explain that to me because it didn't make any sense. In addition to that, we also have, just like you do, I think, maybe not, we have new members in FAMPO that are asking the very same questions about what is the origin of this money, what does it look like, how is that played out? So to the point, we didn't even question that until we got the email saying, oh snap, we plan on cutting FAMPO staff. And it was like, what? This didn't even make sense from our original analysis, even coming out of the TAC. So in defense, I think I'll agree with Mr. Dudenheffer that we staffers started it when we got the email from the administrator saying, oh, if you're going to do this, we're going to have to cut staff. And it didn't correspond to what our analysis had been up to date. So I'm sorry that people feel that way, but we still have to do the due diligence for our residents. We have no other choice.
So, Tim?
Yeah, just a quick one. I just want to point out a couple of things here. You know, in the bigger picture, the core organization is FAMPO. And FAMPO's organization, you know, our responsibility is really about transportation. GWC is there to support FAMPO. GWC should be the smaller organization. And we should be looking for every opportunity to increase or maximize the amount of money towards transportation projects and minimizing the amount of money going towards staffing. And I think some of this, the slides I've seen are trying to do those things. But I think GWC has grown, as I guess I'm still the chairman as of now. We have grown this staff to, we're more focused on GWC and these other initiatives, and we've lost our focus of transportation. I want to point that out. So we should be looking for maximizing transportation funding, minimizing other things.
I would have to wholeheartedly disagree with that thought, but anybody else on the board want to chime in?
I think we made our case.
Well, you've presented a case, Mark. Nobody's had a chance to look at it yet. Could you acknowledge that?
I mean, the numbers came from the staff, came from VDOT and the staff. Why isn't our staff doing this, looking for alternatives to funding this so we can use money such as CMAQ and RSTP to actually do the job of FAMPO?
Anybody else have any comments?
Mr. Chair, may I
Dr.
say
Millsap?
something about that? So I don't know how many of you had a chance to look at the memo we actually sent out on the 11th. And so what we were attempting to do, Mr. Dudenheffer, is exactly what you suggested, which was trying to figure out how to make sure that there was no RSTP, STBG funding used to support FAMPO, and how could we best staff given what we believe was available. So that was the direction that we were trying to go and what we put forward. And what we did is also ask the person that, you know, has been doing a really great job of getting a whole lot of work done over the past several months to do some analysis of the staff and what is it going to take to get the work done. And so that's what the person who has been the person you've been relying on for the last several months, this has been his analysis, but supported by the rest of us, is that that's what it takes. So if you all, though, as FAMPO, want to have a different staffing level and have the funding available, you know, this is no different than it is with, say, the COC or Go Virginia. And as those of you that were on the GWRC call will recall, my suggestion had been for FAMPO to make their budget recommendation, and then GWRC would circle back around as we do with these other organizations and modify appropriately. So it is nothing more than that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Linda, I kind of disagree at the approach and where we've been and where we're going on a lot of this stuff. And my staff is shaking their head, you know, like that doesn't correspond to some of the conversations that we as elected officials haven't been privy to. So I'm going to object, I guess, to some of what you just said.
All right, any other comments on the presentation, if I may? All right, last comment from me to the point made about GWRC versus FAMPO and everything should be going to FAMPO. I probably more than anybody else on this board has been working on the transportation issue and serves on every board that there is under the sun. So one, the focus is on transportation. Two, but there's also housing, economic development, workforce development, and all these other projects that are frankly very important to this region that GWRC assists with. So to basically say GWRC is not there.
By the way, they may be important to the city and GWRC, but they're not to FAMPO. The money from FAMPO should go to doing transportation and roads, not housing and
Mark,
all these extraneous things.
Out of order. I got a floor. All I was responding to is Mr. McLaughlin's comment about GWRC. I was not responding to anything else. All right, we're done with that one. We move on. Okay. Allocation of congestion mitigation, air quality, and surface transportation block grants, regional service transportation program funding. I guess we start with Mr. Nelson and the rest of the staff.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. We have a series of items here, so I would recommend we go in that order, which leads up to a resolution. So,
all right, that would be the 5307 funding eligibility, Mr. Staggerwalt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. As was mentioned in the presentation that Mr. Agnello just provided, we should, the FAMPO, or actually GWRC, should be expecting just a little over $1 million, between $1 million and 1.5 in 5307 funding as a pretty regular stream. You should get that a portion of it every year. That money is coming through PRTC to GWRC as a recipient. The presentation that we saw proposed a mix of uses for that funding that would help reduce the reliance on the funding sources for staff time. So what can 5307, what are the eligible expenses for those 5307 funds? They will actually pay for planning, provided that planning is related to public transportation, planning, engineering, design, the evaluation of a transportation program, but generally around public transportation projects. Studies and planning related to the preparation for construction and acquiring land if necessary, improving facilities and equipment. So in the planning realm for 5307, that's kind of it. It should be related to public transportation on some level. But studies and planning are eligible expenses. 5307 is used probably most often for capital needs for transit agencies. The purchase or lease of buses and other equipment, construction of maintenance facilities, repair and of the facilities and equipment. It can also be used for service and support equipment, onboard equipment for buses like fare boxes. Transfer facilities are an eligible expense for 5307. Bus shelters and access improvements to transit, so sidewalks, bike paths, provided they're within a certain proximity of a transit stop. They can be used to improve rail stations. Improvements related to the Americans with Disabilities Act and compliance with ADA. Mobility management is also an eligible expense, provided that that those funds or the expenses are centered around coordination of multimodal projects for those in the population with limited access. Job access and reverse commute programs are eligible expenses. Introducing new technology, eligible expense. This can be part of land use studies, transit-oriented development, and joint development projects, working with a private firm or individual to produce that transit-oriented development. So while the presentation that you saw is correct, you can use portions of that 5307 funding to finish off projects or supplement for projects. And they could be the road projects. If, for example, there's been an emphasis sometimes from FAMPO to put multimodal aspects to improve smart scale scores. And maybe you have a bus shelter going in and improvements to sidewalk and bike facilities leading to that, to the bus shelter or new bus stop, well, that work, the planning, the engineering, the construction, that's all eligible for 5307. So when we look at 5307, I think one of the things to be important is that we don't confine it to planning and to studies. But this is something that can assist, these funds can assist throughout the network, the realm of what the FAMPO jurisdictions are doing. It's really important. We talked a little bit about coordination. So that coordination with Fred, if you want to make a bus shelter part of your project and use those 5307 funds for that coordination with Fred is really important. I think there needs to be a discussion, my opinion, there needs to be a discussion on a regional approach to using these funds. And these funds should be used, you know, that the subject should be bigger, obviously, and we've begun talking about it. But 5307, that $1.5 million, needs to be brought into that discussion and brought into all aspects. And that, in my mind, also includes potential new uses and what new programs might be available because of these 5307 funds. That's a real high level. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions if any members of the committee have them.
Any questions from the board?
Mr. Chairman, this is Cindy Shelton.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. Can FAMPO staff bill to 5307 money?
It depends on what they're doing. Not everything that they do. It has to be related to public transportation, basically, in some way.
So it's TDM planning, right?
If it's related to public transportation, I think the examples that were in that.
I don't think it's actually public transportation. It's just transportation, right?
No, it's transit public transportation for 5307.
Yeah. The circular.
I'll send you the circular, but it doesn't say that. And I could be wrong. Maybe it's been changed in the last year. I mean, I don't know.
It's pretty much been that way for a long, long, long time.
Yeah. I'll send you the circular.
Okay.
Any other questions? Chair has one quick question, Chuck. You know, the big question here is GW Ride Connect. Does that fall within the transit discussion other than from a capital perspective with regards to operational or planning with 5307?
There are
basically independent. It's not. Does it fall within the definition of a transit operation? I guess.
Correct. They could not use it, for example, for promotion. If they're working on planning activities for public transit, part of their time would be billable to 5307, I guess.
But not directly related to GW Ride Connect itself.
Yeah, basically, the tasks that are performed at GW Ride Connect would not necessarily be chargeable to 5307.
All right, thank you.
Hey, Mr. Chair.
We're going to disagree with that, by the way, and we'll send you what.
I expected you would. Tim?
This may be I'm not sure. I'm just going to throw this out there in general because I kind of brought it up in the GWRC meeting too. When we talk about Ride Connect and all that, again, I question why you're using taxpayer dollar to subsidize private business like this. And again, I think I'm asking is the board to look into the fact is maybe we should look at transitioning GW Ride Connect to Chamber of Commerce or some private industry, or because essentially we are doing the staffing and marketing for a bunch of van pool operators that are private business owners. Because what we're doing, I get why we want to do it, but again, we've subsidized this for years, and maybe it's time to transition that subsidy to private industry. So I throw that out there as a discussion point.
Anybody want to take that up?
Well, this is Crystal Vanuchin Stafford. I actually really like that idea.
Anybody else?
So with that, then, I would I'd like to just, you know, while we're sitting here, make a motion, if that's possible, to have the FAMPO director or whoever, Adam, maybe put a study together and look at what would it take to actually transition that over, let's say the next 4 or 5 years, transition it from a government entity to a private organization, because I think that's what we should be doing. We should be encouraging job growth and business growth in the community.
I'll second.
Can I suggest that we make that a discussion for our next meeting, only because Adam has got enough stuff he's got to do right now, rather than start a full-fledged study at that level. That's when we get a full staff up to FAMPO, I can see you doing that. We don't have all the staff. You guys keep telling me you don't have the staff. Right now, Adam's got balls to the wall trying to get a lot of stuff done. We don't need to add something that significant to his plate right now.
I don't think it's that significant.
Yeah, it is. Transitioning from what it is to a private sector, that's pretty big.
That's called an RFP, or an request for information. Anybody interested in establishing a business that would get marketing and manage these businesses? I don't think that's that hard to do. At least I would ask that we start the initiative now instead of punting it.
Again, I said I have no problem putting it on for the next agenda to have a full-fledged discussion on it, but trying to get it to solve tonight, I think is asking a little much.
I didn't say to solve it tonight. I'm just asking that we motion to move forward on the process. Whether or not we have a presentation, I'll tell you what, Matt, I would like to motion that we put it on the agenda to have a discussion on the next agenda to pursue potentially a transition of Ride Connect, GWR Ride Connect, to a civilian entity.
Can you put, you're talking about the July meeting, by the way, correct?
Is that our next meeting?
I think we have a special meeting we're having too. I just want to make sure we're not adding things to this.
No, not for the special meeting.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a substitute motion. This is Cindy Shelton. I would like to add to that, not just to a private entity, but perhaps some other planning organization like PRTC.
Sure. Yeah.
Do I have a second?
Or you would take
I
it as
accept that.
Well, Tim's got to accept the motion.
Accept the amendment?
I accept the amendment. The substitute motion.
All right. Any further discussion? All those fair signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Say name and no.
No Withers.
I have no problem having the discussion. I just don't know where it's going. Go ahead. Somebody else? All right. GWI Connect funding. Kate?
Yes, good evening. Thank you, Mr. Kelly and members of Policy Committee for taking the time. I'll be brief because I know we have a long agenda tonight. Just wanted to give you a little bit of background and draw your attention to part of what is included in the resolution 20-40. So for many years, as you all know, GW Ride Connect has been receiving an off-the-top allocation of CMAQ funding to support our basic program operations. We've been receiving $125,000 for several years. So I want to draw your attention to the fact that Resolution 20-40, which I believe you all will be voting on at your next meeting on the 22nd, effectively discontinues this annual allocation to GW Ride Connect. And that's part of what Paul went over in his presentation, was some funding sources that we can explore to replace that funding. So we're certainly happy to do that. I just want to note that that information was not available at the time that TAC voted on this last Monday, or at the time that I wrote this resolution. So just keep, or this memo, so just keep that in mind. But we're certainly happy to explore options and support the idea of being creative and using funding to get as many things funded as possible. But as it stands right now, the resolution eliminates GW Ride Connect funding without replacing it with any other sources. So just to give you an idea of what that impact would be, currently the CMAQ allocation represents over 20% of the program's annual budget. 91% of the FY21 budget supports staffing. So losing that money would be pretty detrimental to the program and would cause us to lay off one staff member if we were not able to find funding from another source. The other point that Paul included in his presentation that I was not aware of when I wrote this memo was that there is funding available to be held in reserve for FY22 in the case that we do not find funding by FY22 to replace this funding. So again, I support the effort to look for other funding sources. Certainly happy to do that and work with the TAC to do that. But I did want to draw your attention to the fact that eliminating this funding source without a replacement would be detrimental to our program and cause us to lay off at least one staff member. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the from the board? Excuse me. All right, just a quick question, Kate. If I'm not mistaken, on 2 occasions, the policy board voted to include funding for GWRI Connect to the out years. Is that correct?
You mean last year?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, so we have to make a fundamental policy decision. So part of my request as we follow this forward and getting this budget squared away is, even if you're looking at privatizing this operation, it's going to be years out before you can do it. And we do need to, as we have already passed as a policy board, come up with identified funding sources for GW Ride Connect for at least the next out years as per was policy commission. All right, anything else from anybody? All right, we go on to UPC 110987, Route 208 Hood Drive. Mr. Agnello?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. So I said that this request came before the board for discussion in May. We're formally requesting action tonight. UPC 110987 is a Smart Skill Round 2 project for the Route 28 Hood Drive intersection improvements in Spotsylvania County. We humbly request $772,500, which equates to 15% of the original $5.15 million project budget, to be added to the funding amounts. This will not pay for the entire cost of the project. I said that the most recent VDOT higher cost estimate is about $6.3 million. So the balance of the project cost, which is approximately $380,000, would be the county's responsibility. We request that the funding be added so that it be no later than FY23. Use CMAQ first to the extent possible, and use STBG RCP to fill in the gap not provided by CMAQ funding. I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions from the board? All right. We move on to UPC 105722 Route 1 Enon Road transfer request. Stafford?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Oh, go ahead, Jason.
You go ahead, Alex.
I was going to say I was going to have Jason present this on behalf of Stafford County.
All right, thanks, Alex. I appreciate it. And actually, I'll just tackle briefly this item as well as the next one in front of you, which is yes, for additional RSTP application calls. So new legislation signed into law by the governor reduced the amount of state recordation tax revenue distributions to localities from 40 million to 20 million. And a separate piece of legislation effectively dedicated all 20 million of that state recordation tax revenues to the Hampton Roads Transit Program, effective July 1st of this year. This was a recent action by the state. The change in recordation tax revenue allocations combined with the earmarkings on that revenue have resulted in the loss of state recordation tax revenues for localities, and Stafford is one of these. We've been receiving an average of $870,000 per year in local funds, which was used as a contribution towards state and federal funds for smart scale revenue sharing, things of that nature. This has an immediate impact in our FY21-22 budgets of 1.7, almost 1.8 million. We brought before the TAC a request to allocate an additional $1 million in STP funding towards Enon Road. The TAC did vote positively on that to make that recommendation. In addition, we also have alerted the TAC to Stafford's desire to request additional funds on Route 1 and Telegraph Road as well. We have already put together an application for those and have sent it to the FAMPO staff, but would respectfully request that the policy committee go ahead and open up the ability for additional STP applications to be placed for these STP allocations. This would include any prior year STP funds as well as including the FY26 STP funds. I'd be happy to answer any questions at this time.
Any questions? Adam, I'm going to ask you to comment on these after we get through all three of them. All right. I have not forgotten you. All right. Next one, Stafford County applications for available STBG RSTP funds.
Mr. Kelly, yes, that's the request for the policy committee.
Okay, that's all right. Okay, you just follow right in there. Okay.
Thank you.
First off, Adam, you want to comment on those requests, effects, impacts, issues?
Sure. There's just a couple of things, Mr. Chair. Thank you. So going back to the March Policy Committee meeting, one thing that I wanted to bring the attention of the board to is as far as the process that was initially laid out for this year, where it was a collaborative process, of course, between our current existing FAMPO staff and our TAC leads as far as the allocation process. So what you're seeing before you tonight on the agenda is what I've sort of called a suite of proposals that are sort of put forward and are, as of right now, wrapped into the resolution that's on the table for 9B number 7 there for draft resolution 2040. What Jason just mentioned and what we wanted to make sure that we had clear direction from the policy committee on is one, a direction to consider additional applications for RSTP funding, specifically for the out year of FY26. And then as well, and what Paul will speak to here in just a second in more detail, but that we would be allowed to consider the current 3 CMAQ project applications for RSTP funding. So those are the two pieces that we just want to make sure we have clear direction from this committee to proceed with so that action can be taken this coming Monday if that's the desire of the board.
All right. Any questions for Adam? All right. Request to consider CMAQ applications for RSTP funding. Mr. Agnello?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So to build on what Adam just said, basically the TAC leadership are proposing basically using the same approach that was used for the CMAQ for the available RSTP funding, which is primarily in the out years. We're proposing basically putting forward the same 3 Smart Scale Round 4 candidate projects that were put forward for CMAQ for RSTP funding consideration. The 3 projects are basically in Stafford. There's the Onville Road widening project. In Spotsylvania, there's the 4 Mile Fork intersection project. And in the city, there's the Idlewild BCR Trail Connection project. So putting forward those same 3 projects for RSTP funding consideration, also that they've already gone through the rating for CMAQ and RSTP, so they don't need to be rated again. It just would be the allocation would need to be done. I'll say it's desired that the funding be put in place in time for Smart Scale Round 4. So there's a desire to finish this as soon as possible, just so localities know how much funding is available for these projects and then can make local funding decisions on additional funding to put on projects. With that, I can take any questions.
Any questions from the board? Okay, one comment from the chair. It was my understanding, based on the prior directions from the policy board, that the projects that we would use the CMAQ funding and everything we could to on the existing projects that were going forward, which needs to be voted on pretty much now, so we get them in on time. Everything else is not something that is time sensitive at the moment. And the only concern I've got about doing all these other wonderful things is we still haven't figured out what we're doing with the RSTP funds that we have available or the CMAQ funds we have available for future use in the projects. So I'll go ahead and have Mr. Nelson give the consideration of the resolution, but right now, my thought would be go ahead and vote on those projects for the smart scale that need to get in and going, which we all had agreed on initially. If anything else can wait, again, we're getting a lot of information tonight. 1, 2, we've still not squared away the plan that everybody says they want on how we're going to spend money in the future and who gets money and priority on money. And I'm kind of little uptight about taking decisions on projects before we have those resolved. But having said that, we will discuss it further. Mr. Nelson, you're on for consideration of draft resolution 2040.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. You actually introduced something I wanted to bring up, which is the fact that we are under direction to develop to reevaluate our allocation policies and procedures for RSTP funds. So we did proceed and allocate CMAQ funding per our existing policy, but we do recognize that we are obligated to continue the discussion on the RSTP allocations. Having said that, we also recognize that there were compelling reasons to at least consider allocating those resources per existing policies in the short term to directly benefit existing projects that can use that leverage. So we recognize that we have to continue that process, and we fully intend to, have that process completed by the end of the year. But we did take the liberty, if you will, of suggesting that the RSTP funding that's available now, in fact, be used, and so that is submitted for your consideration. And so the FAMPO resolution is very brief. It references all of the items that have been discussed of putting these available funds on here to those various projects. And then we also we wanted to make a point that we fully supported funding GW Wright, because we recognize the benefit of that program. We recognize that it is the reason 5307 money is flowing in this direction, and that it's a big deal. So we wanted to emphasize, even though we didn't put we didn't reference any specific funding for that in the resolution. So the resolution, again, is very basic. We did take the liberty of addressing RSTP, but we did that within our existing parameters, and we thought it was worthy of consideration.
All right.
I could answer.
Any questions or comments from the board?
We don't not support these.
Mr. Chairman? This is
Michelle?
Cindy Shelton.
Yeah.
This is a draft. Can we add in Telegraph Road?
Just
Adam,
to clarify.
go ahead. I'm going to recognize Adam.
Sure.
Go ahead.
So just to chime in as far as Telegraph Road, so that's one of the pieces where since March, we have not received specific direction to score any additional projects beyond the one per jurisdiction. So that's part of what we're asking for consideration of the board tonight, to direct our staff to score the Telegraph project so that funding could be allocated to that project this year. So it is not included in the draft resolution 2040 per the TAC meeting and where they landed on that discussion this past Monday. So the intention is, as long as it's okay with the board, to direct us to score the Telegraph project, that we would have a separate resolution for consideration on the 22nd to allocate existing sort of previous RSTP funding to that project.
Can I make a request before any motion is made? We need to get the 3 projects funded so we can move forward on the smart scale. Obviously, we've got to get those out of the way. There are so many other unanswered questions which we've already spent a lot of time on this evening talking about that need to be addressed, including GW Wright and that funding in the out years. I'd like to move this resolution with only those projects that are necessary to be approved now, on the understanding we're discussing the balance of the projects at the next meeting. to include CMAQ funding and other things, and also give some of us a little bit of time to digest some of this information we just got tonight. And I'd love to have a motion.
This is I was going to say Sergeant Shelton. It's been too late.
Too much military.
Yeah, it is. Supervisor Shelton. Sorry, they're close. I'd like to make a motion to approve with the ad, of Telegraph Road. But my question. Really, I thought you just said. Sorry, I'm making a motion to approve with the added Telegraph Road. Let's just end it there.
Okay, so you're moving the approval of the resolution as drafted with the addition of Telegraph Road.
Sure.
Second.
Any further discussion? All right, Chairman gets the last comment then before the vote. I've been involved in this operation for a lot of years, and throwing projects in at the last minute, throwing presentations at the last minute, making requests at the last minute when we haven't even figured out half the stuff we need to do, and we wonder why we don't have applications for the position of FAMPO administrator. This probably has been the second most embarrassing meeting I have participated in this organization, because we have not thought through, we have not discussed as a body, we have not gone through anything. We are throwing projects onto a list the night of a meeting as an afterthought. This has never, ever in my career in messing with transportation has that happened. And frankly, what has happened this evening is somewhat of an embarrassment. I will leave it at that, and we'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed, Matt, no.
Withers, no.
Marcy, no.
Steigerwald, no.
Tim, no. Rudy.
Excuse me, point of order, Mr. Chairman. Is Mr. Steigerwald still being considered for a position in Stafford, or in FAMPO that should preclude
not that I
him
would
from
know,
actually
sir.
voting?
No. He's PRTC's representative. He has a right to vote.
Excuse me, Mr. Kelly. You sent me an email earlier about that subject.
And you said no. Fine, I got it.
Exactly. Mr. Steigerwald should abstain from this.
No, he doesn't have to abstain. He represents PRTC.
It is inappropriate for him to
way?
vote on this subject at this time. I
What's
will
the
make
vote total? That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Still? Stacy? Are you still here?
Yes, I'm still here.
Let's do roll call.
Okay, from Stafford County, Cindy Shelton,
Aye.
Mark Dudenheffer,
Aye.
Crystal Vanucci,
Aye.
from Fredericksburg, Matthew Kelly,
No.
William Withers,
No.
Tim Baruti,
No.
he can't because he works. He's a city employee.
from Spotsylvania, Tim McLaughlin,
Aye.
Chris Yakubowski,
Aye.
Deborah Frazier,
Aye.
from PRTC, Charles Steigerwald,
No.
representative from Secretary of Transportation, Marcy Parker,
No.
and I believe that is all voting members.
That is correct.
Okay. 6.
6 to 5.
Yep. 1, 2, 3. Correct.
Motion passes. All right, we move on. Okay, systems for the management and allocation of resources for transportation update. Matthew Lehane, FAMPO.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is just going to be a quick presentation on where FAMPO staff are at with SmartScale. So Adam, you can go to the next slide. So this is the Smart Scale schedule and where we are at. So we had the pre-application period that we completed, and we voted on the resolutions back in March. Those are submitted by the extended date of April 17th. The full application period was supposed to open up June 1st. It was originally moved to June 9th, and now I believe has again been moved to June 22nd. So once that opens, FAMPO staff will start working on the full applications. And the final applications are due August 3rd. They are screened, evaluated, and scored through December, and then the results are released in January. All right, next slide. And this just kind of goes over a couple of the changes. So for this year, there are 5 pre-applications, which we have currently submitted, and we will have to whittle those down to 4 final applications. There are some changes to the application process and the scoring procedures, and notably, FAMPO moved from Category A to Category B. So as you can see below, the picture that changes some of the weightings of such as congestion, economic development, accessibility, safety, environmental quality, and land use. And then this last slide, to date, FAMPO staff have not heard any comments from VDOT or DRPT on our applications. And then this presentation was created before June 9th. So the window is supposed to be open. It is not. So once the window is open, FAMPO staff will begin to work on the final applications. And I can answer any questions you have. Anything I'm unable to answer, we can get answers from VDOT.
All right. Any questions from the board? All right. Thanks, Matt. All right. Public comment period update. Adam, Stacy, which one first?
Stacey, do you want to go first and just provide a quick overview of where things are at with the public comment period?
Sure. So we have web pages that are dedicated to each of the 4 documents that are out for public comment. These web pages provide video resources that walk members of the public through the actual document and explain how they can review and comment. We also have individual surveys for each document that the public can use to provide some targeted feedback. So far, we have 14 surveys completed. We've also had multiple announcements on social media about the public comment period. For the first time, we've ran a Facebook ad and reached over 1,700. There's also been a news article in Fredericksburg Today about the comment period and the importance on the public participating in the transportation planning process. We've also sent notice out to our mass email list and posted on online free community calendars.
All right. Adam?
Thanks, Stacey. I will jump in and give a quick overview of the 4 sort of documents that are out for public comment right now. So the first thing here is the draft 2045 LRTP amendment, which you've seen a couple times by this point. Did want to point out that we did receive a few small comments from VDOT the other day with a few changes to cost estimates and a couple of UPC numbers on a few of the highway projects. So nothing too substantial there. We also did want to point out, for the sake of transparency, what we noticed as a clerical oversight in the initial PE studies project list that we put out for public comment. So I did want to bring that to the attention of the board. This list of 14 projects is the existing, currently approved FAMPO PE studies list. And when we put together the list for public comment, all we had in there was the new tip window PE studies projects. And so what we've done and provided here in the packet tonight is we have simply updated and revised the draft list for the PE studies and kept the existing approved projects in that list. So everything below here is what was initially distributed for public comment and what will be new tip window projects. But like I said, all the projects highlighted in green, as you'll see with the note here, that they were not included in what was initially sent out. It was inadvertent and a clerical oversight. So we did want to provide that to the committee for, transparency's sake. But did also want to see if I could take any questions regarding the draft 2045 LRTP amendment before I move on to the next item.
Any questions from the board? Hearing none. Adam, you're back.
Great, thank you. And that will be up for a vote next Monday. So the second item, the draft air quality conformity analysis report. So that is for the draft 2045 LRTP amendment. To date, we have not received any public comments, and it too will be up for a vote for approval next Monday. So I will just jump right in, if it's okay, Mr. Chair, to the draft FY21 UPWP. And I will ask Dr. Millsaps, of course, to chime in here as necessary as well. So I did want to call your attention to what was distributed in our packet this past week, which is a memo from the management team at FAMPO GWRC to the members of the GWRC board and the FAMPO policy committee regarding historic FAMPO funding, how RSTP funds have been utilized historically through FAMPO, what the current staffing proposal is, and how carryover funding works, and that sort of thing. So there's 5 elements rather here to this proposal. We will be having a meeting with some of the jurisdiction staff leads next Monday, and then there will be a further GWRC meeting to approve their budget. So a lot of this right now is sort of a work in progress, if you will. So no action is needed tonight by the policy committee on the UPWP. One thing that I did want to bring to the board's attention as well regarding kind of the thought process and the context behind the GWRC FAMPO sort of management team proposal that we've put forward, just to call your attention to these things. What we have attempted to do is not in any way to cut FAMPO staffing. What we have done is we have used the existing PL and 5303 revenues and not assumed any increases to those numbers. So whether that's the right approach or not, that can be up to this board to make that decision. What I will say is that, as Paul showed earlier, there have been steady increases in those 2 revenue sources over time. However, we have felt it is a prudent approach financially to not necessarily assume a windfall of funds in the future, which is part of why we landed on the proposed removal of the administrative assistant position. What we would say too is that if the board is set on keeping FAMPO staffed at 7 FTEs based on the projected PL and 5303 sources of revenue, that we would prefer to have that position slated for elimination actually be a planner position, especially in light of the massive effort of the 2050 LRTP that we'll be undertaking shortly. So those are just a couple comments and a little bit of context that I wanted to provide as far as some of the thinking behind the management team as far as what we've put forward to date. But again, like I said, this is largely a work in progress that will be hashed out in a staff level conversation next Monday before the next policy committee meeting. So I did also want to pull up just briefly at the request of a GWRC board member, Ms. Baumke, last month requested that we provide a document that gives an overview of changes between the FY20 and the FY21 UPWP. There are not too many substantial changes. We've largely kept the structure and the format of the document the same, but we did ask Stacy to go through, and she did a great job pointing out what the changes in this document are. So if anyone has any questions about those changes and sort of how we've spelled those out, I would be happy to take those either during the meeting or anytime thereafter. And then lastly, what we have for the FY21 UPWP, as well as the FY20 UPWP amendment, which largely tie together, is we've presented what was published initially for the public comment period in, I believe, May 14th, so that the public comment period could start May 20th. We have a tracked changes version, so it's clear what all the updates have been since May 14th until June 10th, when we had to finalize the documents for our packet. And then lastly, a clean version of where things stood as of June 10th. So based on discussions tonight, of course, especially along the lines of the CMAQ and RCP allocations, there will be some other updates to this document. So we'll make sure to do a second iteration of the process to where we illustrate the track changes to where it's clear from one point to another what those steps have been to get to the document that we arrive at for a vote next Monday. So I would be happy to take any specific questions regarding the UPWP or the FY20 UPWP amendment.
Any questions from the board? One quick question, Adam, back on the staffing situation. The administrative assistant, if we hired him, what would they be doing now?
So that is a current position that is filled. So that is largely related to a typical admin role. I think in most organizations, especially governmental agencies, where assistance with the preparation of the agenda, taking minutes, keeping track of documents, that type of thing is the general gist of that position.
Thank you. All right, item 10, correspondence. Anything, Adam, that we should be aware of?
No, not for tonight's meeting, but we will have some next week.
All right. Staff and agency reports. Anything of interest?
Not from the staff.
All right. Board member comments. Anybody from the board have any comments? Going once, twice.
Mr.
All
Chairman,
right.
Mark,
Go ahead.
VDOT.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
just want to remind everybody that the Chatham Bridge is closing Monday morning at 5 a.m. and it will be closed until October of 2021. Hopefully you've seen our notifications and social media, so just pass the word around. Starting Monday, 5 o'clock, you cannot drive across the Chatham Bridge.
Thank you, Marcy. Good luck with that one. All right. Item 13, Chair will entertain a motion to adjourn next committee meeting June 22nd at 6 p.m.
Is it going to be a question, Mr. Chairman? Are we going to do WebEx or whatever we're doing here?
Yes.
Or
My understanding right now, we're still planning to do it virtual.
we cannot hold a meeting is based on phase 2 of the government's mandate. These meetings, I think, are highly ineffective compared to when we're all in the same room and we can sit down and discuss this stuff. But so I think we should go back as soon as we possibly can. I'm not saying we have to go back next week, but I think we're much more effective when we're in the same room.
Hey, so, Mr. Chair, I mean, I think GBRC scheduled a meeting for the 24th. Is that it? Is that correct?
Yes.
Well, I would propose that we move the 22nd meeting to the 24th, so we have both meetings on the same night, if that's possible.
Well, the only thing is we've got a lot to discuss in both these meetings.
Oh, yeah, FAMPO's got all day, so that's not a problem. I don't know. There's a whole lot to discuss. And say again.
I'm at the beach in Florida.
Say again. Sorry.
The
Mark's not gonna
24th
be
is
here.
not a good day. We made previous.
We'll leave it at the 22nd. And right now, it'll be virtual. We'll chat about it some more if we need to offline. Don't want to start that conversation right now. All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn, Sheldon.
So moved.
All right. We'll consider Cindy your second. All right. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. We're done.
We did it, guys.